And we're recording. Okay, so hello
Oh yeah, alert.
everyone. Yes, this is a Boyo recording on Girard, and I have with me Magenta. Hi, Magenta. How are you doing?
Hello. I think we should also say it's a boyette alert.
Yes. Excuse me. Yes, I'm I'm really sorry. I should have said that exactly. So Boyos and Boyettes. Today we're gonna talk about Girard. Magenta is leading the Girard charge in the Boyosphere, and it's a topic of growing importance, and there's a lot of buzz around it. So I don't even know what we're going to talk about exactly today because I haven't seen this presentation yet. So Magenta, I'm going to just yield you the floor, and I think we can get
Okay.
cracking.
Well, I don't really know either. I've just put these slides together. But and I've used some pictures that I think one of the boyos put up these pictures on the Discord. It's like really evocative paintings. I don't even know the artist, which is terrible. But anyway.
Oh, that's a
Um,
Polish artist, I think, and
yeah,
yeah,
that
he
sounds
has
right.
amazing paintings, kind of blurring the lines between reality and the dream world. You know.
Mm, mm. And this is Girard is very interesting because there's a sort of a very stark kind of reality to Girard that is really, it's a little bit dark really and a little bit bleak
Mm.
because it's I think partly because it cuts through. It's really true, but at the same time I think we can build, like there's the other side of it is that, you know, like anything in life, when you actually come to grips with the truth, then you can actually grow and move on. So yeah,
Mm.
so we'll see how we go. But so it's a little, maybe it's a little bit dark. But
I
anyway.
like it because that's kind of a returning Boyle theme as well, of
Is
looking
it?
into the scary stuff, looking into something that might be terrifying. For example, like the whole
Yeah,
Ion series, you know, that's
yeah,
why
yeah,
that's why they were so engaging and also so attractive, because Peterson didn't want to look into it.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
famously or infamously, he said that, wow, if you want to get into Jung, like don't read Ion. So that's exactly what the Boyos did. Or
yeah,
even
yeah, yeah.
or even if you think about Nietzsche, it is some like a body of work that's considered to be dark. And look, maybe it is, but the point
Yeah.
is to look into it, to face it. And Girard, it's I think he's really, really special based on what I've seen. I mean, based on what you told me, some of the videos that you sent. Again, people have started to scratch the surface of Girard out on the
Yeah.
internet. I'm reading two of his books. One is I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, and the other is Battling to the End. One is about Satan,
Hmm.
who what evil actually is, who he is,
Yeah.
and also Battling to the End is about the apocalypse. Two
Yeah.
very uncomfortable topics that
That's it.
even hardcore Christians don't really like to entertain these ideas. This is
It's
something that
really interesting. Yeah.
yeah, people don't
Because
like to touch. So I'm super
yeah,
excited.
and it's like it's scary from many directions, because I think like Christian scholars and commentators are obviously very drawn to Girard because he provides he's a very highly, you know, regarded scholar who provides a rational path into Christianity, but at the same time they find it confronting because it is a rational path. You see, it is real, like it, and it's it's saying, like you said when you were talking to Steph and the other boys about the Iliad. I think you said that it's you don't have to have a mystical understanding of
Mm,
Christianity to get to Christianity in a really deep way through Girard, right? You don't
mm,
have to
mm.
have that. You can be completely uh, uh, devoid of that, and in a sense, that is kind of frightening, especially um, in that there's a whole lot of beauty in Christianity, and like the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches and so on, which is things that like Jonathan Peugeot talks about or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, so and in a way it sort of lays it bare, you know. It says it might, you know, in a sense, he's saying, well, the Christian myth is another myth. It is a myth, and that's a hurdle for Christians, strong Christians, in a sense. But he's saying it's got a difference to it, and you know, I'm not saying, and he's certainly not precluding the mystical or faith-based a connection with Christianity. He's not precluding that at all. I mean, he himself, as you know, later in his life, he had a deep, he had two, what do they call them?
Two conversions,
Conversions,
right?
two conversions. Yeah. So his first conversion was on this rational basis because he was following through the implications of his observations that he'd made about myth, but he'd initially made it about great literature. He'd compared the great literature, the Western of the Western canon, and he'd found a repeating pattern in them. So then he tested that pattern against myth, a world myth, cultural myth from all over the world, and he found this repeating pattern. So he was really following the implications of that through. And, you know, he thought to himself, well, you know, my heritage is Christianity. I should look into that. And so his pathway into it was, again, he was just following these implications of this pattern that he'd found. And that was his first conversion, in a sense, because he found something which we will get to. He discovered something that was different about the Christian myth, that was different from all the other patterns that that actually diverged from this one pattern that he'd found in everything else.
That's really good. And just a side note here, to follow up on some of the stuff that you said. This is actually one of the reasons why Jung was so compelling to me, because in a way it was a semi-rational way to Christianity, in terms of we have this science called psychology, and it's a science. It's really rooted in empirical evidence and empirical knowledge. And what Jung did, I think, masterfully, is that he didn't shy away from the transcendent in that sense, and the experience of the transcendent in a human being. He thought that it's an essential part of how we operate and how our psyche operates, even the nature of our psyches. And what he did basically is even approach Jesus Christ as a psychic reality, as a psychological reality, really explaining how it functions. And there was some sort of connection to metaphysics as well, but still like rooted in psychology. And that was also, I think, for me, a rational way in, because I had a lot of rational inhibitions about Christianity being this superstition and this whole Christ mystical thing being some weird spiritual stuff. And it, in a way, Jung did demystify this and allowed me personally to interact with Jesus Christ for the first time. It was like really taking a pill, Now, what Girard does, I think he approaches it from a different angle based on what I've seen. And it may be even more powerful, because it is about demystifying Christianity and just really pointing at the fact that Christianity itself demystifies religion, which is kind of counterintuitive, you see.
That's it. Exactly.
And maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but maybe just to kind of like paint a picture of what I think is going on ultimately is that even in the beginning of the book, I see Satan fall like lightning. He talks about how the resurrection was key. At the same time, if you just read Girard without the resurrection or without the divinity of Christ, you can completely let those things go. As I said in the previous Boyle cast, you can let those go, and it still works, because it just points. Yes, it just points to a social, psychological reality.
Actually, I think
anthropological, yes.
Anthropological, even, it's that deep, and it's that, it's that foundational, but and that's exactly it. And I think I think so. You have this wariness on behalf of the Christians who are sort of who are wary about the fact that it's demystifying things and that it's providing another explanation from what they're used to in terms of entering the Christian myth. But then on the other hand, you also have people who are non-Christian or whatever who are coming at it from a more rational point of view, and they are wary of it because it says, well, the Christian myth was different, and it is different, and it should be respected, and it should be looked at, and and I think that makes the other side of the debate wary, and so I think from all. And then the other
sides,
big reason from both sides of the kind of divide that we've kind of created, which we'll get into because that's a classic mimetic mirroring that's created. We've created in our culture now. But the other big thing is that, like, you personally as a reader, as you're reading, is the pennies start to drop and it makes more and more sense, and you start to think, I understand what he's talking about because I do it.
Yes,
and I know that all my relationships are riddled with this problem and this core sort of kind of unnerving truth about human nature, right? So
yes, exactly.
Yes, it's scary. We're very bold. We are very brave. We're very courageous, and I really think, honest to God, that we are going to blow Ion out of the water, man.
Ah, great. Well, I look forward to that. And by the way, even if you think about Jung, a lot of people do shy away from what he was actually saying, because if we think about something pretty basic like shadow integration as a concept, like, of course, people don't want to look at their own shadows. I don't want to look at my own shadow. Like, it's not, it's uncomfortable. And it hurts. And the same thing with Girard, as you said. I had the exact same experience. You read the book and pennies start dropping all over the place.
And guess what? And it's not even a kind of like an abstract idea of the shadow. It is just your own resentment that you
yes.
Then and then you see it all around you, like just.
Absolutely. And by the way, you
think, that's why I feel like that about that person, or that's why I feel like that about that person. And you can, it's not even kind of spooky and clever. It's no like, oh man, I've managed to integrate my shadow. It's just like, oh man.
And it's really a revelation about the nature of evil. And look, for me personally, probably that's the most interesting and relevant part of it. Again, as we dive into it, probably all kinds of things will emerge. But this whole nature of evil, basically the point that he's making, based on what I've read so far, is that Satan, so evil, does hide in these mimetic processes. That's how he disguises himself, ultimately. And it's this whole elaborate ruse, ultimately, that leads to all the violence. But you can't really point to it. And
the whole of culture has a kind of a forgetting about, and there's an amnesiac sort of relationship to the mimetic desire.
And that too. No, that was it. So the nature of evil, because I have this, not obsession, but I can see this now more and more about deception, just all over the place. And how deception works. What is deception, actually? Because we can talk about deception, but what is the underlying mechanism of deception? I mean, where does it come from? How does it work? And it's not being really talked about. I mean, there are some books throughout history, like, for example, the book Propaganda, which is a classic. But again, it's not taking that deep dive like Girard for some reason. And when you do, it's it's both very revealing and you get all these epiphanies. At the same time, it is very uncomfortable. So in a way, I think like the whole Jungian shadow integration is a good intro to it, or it really prepares you to be able to take on these difficult ideas more. That may be the case why Girard is not really being discussed in general, by the way.
I agree. I think that may be the case. Like, anyway, well, it's an we've got an advantage, Lazlow. We are boldly going when no one has gone. I mean, there's other people who've gone here, that's for sure, but usually in rather an academic way, whereas maybe we can bring a bit of a boyo. And yeah, so this picture here, let's just relate that to what we were saying. It's like we're all sitting on this horse that we think is us and we think is taking us somewhere, and there's like maybe this our culture, but underneath, you know, there's this it's not really as solid and firm. It's more fragile than we thought. There's a lot of potential for death and freaking out on that ride. Anyways, it's a beautiful picture, and the light on those trees, the fire, it's like fire on those trees there or something, or the sunlight or sunset or something. Anyhow, let's start at the very beginning. I won't sing because I know that would probably freak people out too much, but let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. All right, let's just go. All right, can you see that? I'll just move this over there. Can you recognize that? Okay, so I've been reading, I haven't probably even read as much as you now. Like, I have read one book very much in depth, which is Girard's book about Shakespeare, called The Theatre of Envy, which kind of, again, it's one of these things that it just goes straight in and it just unlocks this mystery around Shakespeare's genius. It says, you know what? Shakespeare just understood this thing, the same thing that Dostoevsky understood, the same thing that Proust understood, and so on. Anyway, since then I've started reading a book called The Mimetic Brain, and also I'll be listening to anything I can on YouTube. So there's like some really good channels out there. There's one called Imitatio, and there's a guy called Craig Stewart who's like really comprehensive, if anyone wants a really comprehensive go through. But in listening to some of these playlists on the Imitatio, I don't know how you pronounce it, YouTube channel, you realize, and this other book that I'm reading, which is called The Mimetic Brain, you realize that we are born imitating. So it is an innate characteristic that comes with being human genetically, like it comes biologically with us. So it's not that we learn how to imitate, which is what Piaget thought, that in child development, children got to a certain point where they could learn how to imitate, and that's how they then continued to learn. We actually imitate before we learn. So they've looked at infants that have been born for only 42 minutes, and they're mimicking the facial movements of the mother. So this is, I think, what the argument is, that 30 years behind Girard's theory, we have got now science around mirror neurons and the science around imitation propensity of humans that corroborates what Girard was saying, which is that this is a foundational aspect of human nature.
And he says that it's not like it's a negative thing, because and again, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but you know what? I'm not gonna arrive at his conclusion just yet. But he says that ultimately this capacity to imitate, that's actually God-given. So it's innately good, but ultimately it got corrupted. This is also, again, just evil kind of playing a trick of taking something that's good and corrupting it, because even his conclusion in the end is something along the lines of our only way out is actually to imitate. But I'm not going to give it away just yet. But
don't give it away yet.
yeah,
That's the end, not the beginning. Okay. So exactly, and the point about it is that this imitation is, in a sense, it's empathy, and empathy, as you know, is the beautiful gold at the heart of human compassion. You know, it's the ability to follow and want to be and part of another being, and in fact, they show now, as you know, that when you see someone doing something like playing some sort of sport or having like falling over or laughing, the part of the brain that they're using to execute that action lights up in your own brain as you observe them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like when we watch others do things or feel things, we experience it in the same part of our brain that they are experiencing it. So it's like an instantaneous coordination with their experience. And as you say, this is enormously positive, and this is obviously a learning process. This is how humans learn, and our productivity can be like massively enhanced, because they've shown that it's not just that we can imitate and experience the actions as they are being done, but what we understand innately, or what we can see, is the intention of the actions. So so they did this experiment where there's the experimenter is trying to pull the lid off this object, but they keep slipping and not managing to get the lid off, right? And the baby is watching, and when the child picks it up, the child opens it, because the experimenter has been pretending that they can't do it, and they've been trying to do it, but the child doesn't imitate the pretend
It's
action.
so good.
The child imitates the intention of the experimenter, right?
So genius.
So therefore, there's a very spooky coordination of understanding between human beings, of not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it, and what their purpose is, what their goal is, what they mean by it. And you don't get this same thing in animals. So you don't. For example, chimpanzees can do really sophisticated social things, but they can't point to something and have another chimpanzee understand that they're indicating something, or offer something in their hand and have the other. They don't offer something, and this is all about intention and understanding that there is another mind in the other chimpanzee, or there is what humans understand is that's different about us to animals. We understand that human, there's another mind inside that human, and this is what they're finding anyway.
This is so good, because it's already kind of blowing my mind, because if you think about this whole paradigm of, we're just another animal, and this whole tendency throughout history, especially in the last 200 years, of, I don't know if it's a word, but animalizing the human being. We're just another animal. Because if you break it down to the level of chemistry, so the chemicals, our cells, or how we work, well, it's the same flesh, it's the same matter as an animal, right?
Absolutely,
yeah. And physically, we have the same mechanisms working in us. But this is why I think Girard is such a genius, is because I know that he didn't do these experiments, but he was really pointing at these differences, and I think he's the best I've seen in articulating why certain things are special. Because in that sense, okay, he does point to Christianity as being special amongst the religions. It does have all the constituent pieces that other myths and religions have, but it is special. And it's the same with human beings. Yes, you do share a lot with dolphins and chimpanzees,
Yes.
but you are
Yeah.
special. And for some reason, we're not really accepting that fact that we are special. And probably because it's difficult, because once you're special, it does come with responsibility. It's much easier to say that, oh, I'm just another animal. I'm like the subject of my instincts and my instincts only. And even though we know for a fact, this is not like new information that Girard really introduced, he's just like pointing at stuff that we already know. So this is great.
And it just reminds me of this whole concept. I don't know, I can't remember where it came from. There's a couple of different places where it might be. Oh, first of all, I want to say that, yeah, like, you know, a lot of this stuff I'm just pulling from other people's existing work, but it's like not my original work or anything like that. But also there's this concept of love indoctrination, which is either the continuum concept, which is an amazing book about how the Western culture has lost the continuum of child raising that is more innate and more innately human. But it could be this other book called The End of the Human Condition. But this is the idea of love indoctrination, where human babies have a very long in-arms gestation period compared to all other animals. And this theory is that part of this is to increase the amount of empathy and connectedness and love, in a sense, in human nature, and so it creates social relations and increases the ability of social relations. Anyway, that's another big theory. That's
also there is
it reminds me of that.
Yeah, and there's also research done on the correlation between the duration of breastfeeding and psychopathy. So apparently, the shorter that period is, the higher the chance that the individual will become psychopathic.
Yeah, and the other thing they've done research on is all the different animals and the complexity of their social and conceptual functions, like compared to how long they take to raise their young. So like magpies, for example, the magpies, Australian magpies, take a good long year, and they've got these little magpies running after them for a whole year. They're teaching them how to do different things, like how to graze and farm the insects across the lawn or whatever. And whereas like turtles just lay their eggs and they disappear. And there is a correlation between the social capacity of a species and how long it is looking after its young. So anyway, we come out, we're already primed to imitate in a way that is like a deep, what you might say, resonance with another human being. That's what we're primed to come out doing. And we not only imitate the actions of that human being, but we understand the intention behind them. So, okay, next slide. So now this is one of the scary slides. It's going to have a nice scary picture.
What
so
is
here
the
we are
painting?
looking in here. I don't think it's the same artist. I don't know. I just will find out. But like yeah, I was just in a hurry, so these are the best pictures I had on my computer. So because we've got this propensity, we imitate desire as well. So we don't just we see what the intention of that experimenter is, to open that jar, and so that when we get the jar, we decide, well, they wanted to open it, I want to open it. There must be a reason, there must be a purpose. I will imitate their desire. And this is scary, because what Girard is essentially saying is that we don't have our own desires that have arisen somehow from our unique being that we are ourselves. They're all derived from the social interactions, and so he calls this in interdividual psychology, so that everyone's psychology is not just their own unique psychology. It's an interdividual psychology, and it's created by the interactions between humans. Yeah.
Just like a quick idea here. You know that they've done experiments back in the 80s, maybe even the 70s, where this whole idea of we're just another animal, and look, we almost found the missing link with chimpanzees. So we're going to do this experiment where they started to raise a chimpanzee infant amongst humans, and also a human amongst other chimpanzees, of course with human supervision. And the expectation was that, we will bring up the chimpanzee a little bit, and maybe the human infant will kind of pick up the intentions and everything else from the chimpanzees. But what actually happened is that it didn't work at all with the chimpanzee, but the human child was actually becoming very animalistic, and he didn't, so he completely adapted to the chimpanzees. Now what I'm just thinking is it probably has to do with the capacity. So the chimpanzee infant didn't have the capacity to pick up our desires and our intentions, because they are probably like higher and more complicated. But the human child, he had the capacity to pick up the intentions and the desires of the chimpanzees easily.
He did, like he picked it up really well.
Yeah.
Like a sponge.
Yes.
Because actually we've got more mirror neurons than other animals. The chimpanzees don't have this, and there's some suspicion that like our whole brain is saturated with mirror neurons in all sorts of parts of our behavior and brain and way of thinking. So so the scary part about this is that actually this idea we have of ourself and our self wanting things and our self doing things is to some extent an illusion, because, and this is where you can relate it to your own experience. You're on a path, like, you can relate to this. I'm sure many boys can relate to this, because we're all in this crowd of people a little bit we're always drawn to the most interesting, exciting thing really easily. So we might be on this path, and then as a boy says, "Oh, watch this video," so you go and watch that video, and it takes you down a whole rabbit hole, and then there's another rabbit hole, because it's like you get their excitement and desire for that it draws you in, and in a sense then you get involved in that, and then until the next person comes along and says, "Oh, this is really good, have a look at this," and then you go that
This
way.
applies to Girard as well, by the way. If you think about it, like how this whole topic popped up, it's super interesting. But then others on Twitter as well, it goes viral. Wow, now I'm confirmed and justified in my interest, so it only increases my desire. So
Exactly.
Exactly.
And there was a few quotes that I actually pulled out, actually. And one of them is something like, that was how do I go back? There we go. One of them is that we're not really convinced that our desire is actually a valid desire until someone else is really desiring it as well. And then we're like, "Oh yes, it must be good because they like it too." But this is the sort of thing that Girard highlights, that kind of makes you a bit uncomfortable, because you think, you're not really as autonomous as you think you are. So in a sense, my list here is like, you can get drawn into the social people around you, into their likes and dislikes. You are motivated by other people's motivation. They can determine your direction. And like, you think about memes and how the whole idea of memes is that they're these catching ideas. They're these contagious ideas. And as you're absolutely right, like, there's this sense that Girard is this exciting new area. And I feel like, you know, in the kind of milieu that we're hanging around in, it's like ideas are a real currency. And so like,
Yeah,
you know, the
that's true.
latest thing, yeah. So like, and so you can look at other people's objects, you know, advertising. Obviously, this is a really, that whole thing about advertising and you know, propaganda and all that is the most obvious thing about human beings. You know, like you have someone showing an object and showing their desire for the object, and that's how we advertise stuff to people. And people simply just, they can't help but be influenced that, like, by
Oh
that.
yeah, and also the higher the social status of that individual expressing
Yeah.
their desire. So like movie stars, for example, you know, the stronger the effect is. You know.
Mm. So people's beliefs, so all of these things, belief, your taste in things, you know, your personal design style that you like to think that is yours particularly, you've got it from somewhere else. And alliances, of course, you know, which person, this person is in the in group and this person's not so much on the in group, and that's very contagious as well, as you know, in any social situation. And if someone's, I think we were talking about this a bit earlier, as soon as someone says something negative about someone else, it is really hard to forget that and interact with them with a clean slate. There's a whole lot of suggestion going on around the way people interact with each other there that creates alliances. But even passion and drive and goals and things like that can be just really, you know, you can catch them from other people. So this picture here, this is a mirror where, you know, you're looking into the mirror, and in a sense, your sense of self, in a sense, is constantly recreated by your social surroundings. Okay, move on.
Oh yeah, and also just a note on imitation and mimesis, because Girard, I just read it in I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, that he could have called it also imitation, but he specifically decided on mimesis, and I forget why. Actually, there was a specific reason why it transfers something else. Do you know about this, or do you remember
No,
anything about?
I think I have read it myself, but I can't remember either.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe for the next episode.
Maybe. All right. So this is like, I chose this picture because I saw these dogs playing down at the lake, and one dog had a tennis ball, and this little dog, this little white dog, this is not them, but this little dog had a tennis ball, and he was like making the tennis ball move, and then he was looking at the other dog as if to say, look what I've got this amazing thing. And the other dog was kind of going, oh yeah, he has. And in a sense, there's a whole prey, you know, he was turning the ball into an object of desire. He was turning it into prey, in fact, in a sense, like, and sparking the other dog's interest. And they're just like, even though we've just been talking about, you know, animals being animals and humans, it was like so human the way he was doing that. And you see these dogs here, like, just playing, where they this dog has got a bit of stick or some bit of rubbish that he's picked up on the beach, and the other little dogs go, oh, I want that looks really good.
Yeah.
And everyone, every Girard video you ever listen to will tell the story about you know, when you leave two children, there might be, you know, in a room together, and there might be like 100 different toys, but as soon as one child picks up one toy, the other child wants that toy.
Yes.
Out of all 100 other ones. And then they can get into quite a screaming state of distress when they can't get that one. So the other's desire creates your own desire, and desire is really contagious because you have these mirror neurons, and so behaviors that people are, you cannot but be influenced, highly influenced by these behaviors, right, of other people. So then another image that I can't remember who it was using this example, but I thought it was a very powerful one. It's like there's, you know, you have this image of two dogs or two wolves working together to run down some prey, and these two dogs appear to be cooperating. But what they are doing is what has happened is that their desire has simply coincided. And so it can be really cooperative. And there's, at the end, there is a lot of positive things we're going to say about this, because like there is a way through, and there is a way of getting the best, most positive, like synergistic stuff out of this problem. But I'll just continue down the dark path for a little while, because this mutual desire appears to be cooperative, but it's very fragile, because in any story about more than one person honing in on one object of desire, you have this inherent rivalry that gets evoked. And I think it's worthwhile. I don't know if you've got any examples that spring to mind, but it's kind of worthwhile talking about your own experiences here.
About rivalry?
About that feeling that you get, that feeling you get when, you know, like someone has, so we've been going on this path of sort of like wanting other people to desire what we desire, because that validates our desire for us, right? And we really want them to understand. It's like me and Girard, right? Because I really wanted everybody to understand Girard. I really wanted. This is really exciting. This is really good. Let's say you ever want it. And then, like, when like you are getting more and more interested, and then suddenly, like, I'm going, but Han, like, I don't want you to take it from me.
So true, so true. This is like so funny how perfect the example is. I mean, I can think of some personal experiences. Let's say when I was in secondary school, and I did have girlfriends that I wasn't really attracted to personally, because
I mean, you've got to have a girlfriend, because like it's a status thing, right? So
yes, very true. Yes, but also. Yes, but I was more into the artistic, more eccentric girls. I wasn't really into the more popular, magazine cover photo girls. Personally, it was just like a personal preference. But I did have these
personal preference, but actually,
and like I did have a few of these token girlfriends though, just because they were a subject of other people's desires. And just purely out of that, and I even knew that it's not coming from me, but still, I mean, I did go to the lengths of getting into a relationship with them, investing time, investing energy. So that might be it, you know, just because they were a subject of desire, and people were kind of engaging in rivalry and competing for that, just because of that, it had value.
And if someone tells you that they don't have a story about like adolescent imitative desire, then they're lying, because like I think it's the classic situation, you know. I was thinking back, you know, because this whole idea of first love and how potent that is, like, can often be that there are two really good friends, like two men, like two young men, two boys are like really good mates, and they like, you know, really do everything together and like go and explore the world. And but then their desire falls on the same girl. And you know, and this is maybe the other thing about this, and this is coming back to what you were saying about Helen of Troy, is that of course then the whole thing starts to get inflamed, because the desire of the other boyo inflames your desire for the girl, and inflames the other boyo's desire for the girl. And the whole point about Helen of Troy is that the desire of the other side for her is what created her beauty, in a sense. And that escalated into a horrible war, like a really horrible war. that was the and then yeah, so this is a classic example really of you know, those triangles, those excruciating triangles that you know, everyone could probably remember.
I mean, even
Example.
Nietzsche had that, right? With that, I don't know if you know the story, but they had this love triangle, and I'm blanking on the names. I mean, I know Friedrich Nietzsche in the
Yeah,
triangle, and then there was the woman. Look, I mean, don't quote me on that, but I think it might have been like Lou Salome or someone that comes to me. I might be completely wrong. And there was this French guy. Again, I don't even want to take a guess on his name, but they were friends together, and they were
yeah,
going on these trips and adventures together. They were all intellectuals, and
yeah,
Nietzsche actually ended up proposing to the woman, and she rejected him, and actually she went with the other guy. But it's just an interesting example from history when they were
absolutely.
competing for the same woman, and of course that broke up the friendship. And actually also this did spark a lot of bitterness and resentment in Nietzsche. I'm not sure if it was even admittedly so. I don't know if he reflected on this in any way, but you know, it probably happened. It's
Yeah,
kind of
and
undeniable.
and Girard is really quite scathing about Nietzsche, um, I have to say, and he says that Nietzsche had a pathological rivalry with Wagner,
Interesting.
and that this drove Nietzsche on to greater and greater heights. But it was a real, like, he was at first he hero worshipped Wagner, and then he more and more started to deny his genius and stuff, as especially as Wagner became more successful and Nietzsche didn't get the same level of success. So that's
Yeah,
really quite.
maybe we can also take a dive into that on a later conversation, and see what actually happened under the hood, because I imagine that every person in history was subject to this, including Nietzsche and you and me and everyone else, you know,
Exactly.
and then look at their work through that lens. So it would be interesting to kind of dissect Nietzsche, like where did mimesis kick in, and where was it possible for his, you know, thought system to be corrupted, like just like everything else and every other person in history.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Okay, so what's the next page? I can't remember. Okay, so then we get this escalation situation, right? Because we are imitating the desire, then there's this sort of inflammation of the desire, and then which is essentially this sense of rivalry, and there's this flip from being the best of friends to being rivals. And then what happens is we imitate the rivalry, and as it escalates, we imitate the violence that comes out, and it becomes this one-upmanship. You know, you see it in any sort of family domestic argument, or any argument where, you know, one pushes and the other one pushes even stronger, and then, you know, it just becomes more, it just escalates. And this is a contagion of violence, is because once it starts down this track, the mirror neurons and the propensity to imitate is just as strong in the negative as it is in the positive. So and this is a quote from Girard himself, and he's talking about his play, about Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar, because he, you know, forensically dissects a lot of these plays. There is the one about the Trojan War. There is an actual Shakespeare play about the Trojan War, which would be really cool to actually go through that. Like,
No, we should do that. Absolutely.
that would be really good, because actually that one, in that play, Shakespeare starts off with just one girl and one boy, and at that micro level, he shows the whole mimetic process going on, and then it's in the context of this boyo is a Trojan soldier, and so it's in the context of the Trojan War, and he shows the parallel between the micro relationship and the macro war. It's really interesting. But this one is this play about Julius Caesar, which, as you know, Julius Caesar was the victim of a conspiracy to kill him, right? You know, that famous phrase, et tu, Brutus. You know,
Yeah.
Brutus is, you know, his friend. And then in Shakespeare's play, you really see Brutus struggling with his sense of rivalry with Caesar. And at the certain point that Brutus begins to be able to convince himself that it's for the best that Caesar is assassinated, and Shakespeare shows the disintegration of the hierarchy behind that's keeping the Roman army strong as it starts to disintegrate through this mimetic process, and the clear sense of degree is corrupted. And this is the quote. It says, the contagion is such that the entire community is finally divided into two vast conspiracies that can only do one thing: go to war with each other.
Yeah.
And this is, like, I find this very interesting in terms of our current, you know,
so relevant. It gives me the chills. Yeah.
And there's a certain stage of this rivalrous violence as it starts to escalate, where the people involved they're very intent on demarking their difference from each other. But they're so inflamed by rivalry and antagonism that actually they become more and more similar. So there's a mirrored enmity between them. So that and like if you think about it in our cultural terms, think about extreme vegans and extreme carnivores.
Yes.
All right. You think about radical feminism and radical incel type style thing. And you think about figureheads. You think about Jordan Peterson and what's that young girl who does the climate change stuff?
Greta Thunberg.
So you have these two opposites, but the very opposite oppositeness of them, it becomes almost
they're mirroring each other in that way. Yeah.
So then you get this escalation into violence. Right.
It's also interesting, by the way, how you mentioned Julius Caesar and Brutus. In Hungarian, we do have a phrase that we say all the time, is "Te is fiam Brutus," which means "you too, my son, Brutus." And it's just interesting because we do say that in everyday conversation. So it does point to that element, to that pattern that usually happens also with these phrases that are, for some reason, are durable, you know, that are pointing at these desires. And I just remember that, for example, in primary school, we did have only two classes. It was a small school that I attended, and we had only two classes, A and B. It was exactly the same. It was just by chance, you know, in which class you landed. And there was such strong rivalry and hate between the two groups with no apparent reason. And children are usually great examples of these psychological processes playing out, because there's no civility just yet. And as we started to mature, these conflicts and oppositions started to kind of like subside and became, you know, well managed, but still like the raw desire was still there. So that's interesting.
The gut feeling. Yeah, absolutely. If you've ever worked in any corporate context, you know, like I used to say to people, they used to say, oh, we're going to restructure everything, we're going to make this group this. And I said, as soon as you take those that group of people who are working really well together, and they're working really well together, and it's working really well. As soon as you take that and you're going to split that into two, it will become us and them. You
Yeah,
cannot stop it from becoming us and them. That's what will happen. Anyway.
yeah, exactly. And also, by the way, this us and them, us versus them, and this will probably lead us to the scapegoating stuff soon as well. But this is actually a technique that's being openly used in business about creating an enemy. I mean, I know that in our company, in our previous company, we did it, and we even told the employees what's happening. Of course, like not that openly, but I mean, if they asked, it wasn't a secret that we needed to create an enemy with regards to like a competitor, for example.
Yeah.
Someone to fight against for the same prize. And it's just such a powerful tool that engages people on a deep and fundamental level. It just works.
It's tribalism. And, you know, this is why you got to be really careful in these times, because like this is what's being created, us and them all the time, us and them. We can talk about toilet paper and the
this perfect example. The toilet paper thing is just a perfect example of this.
Yeah, well, because I think I was saying to you the other day that like you know, when you actually do the maths and you actually look at it from just a sheer logistics point of view, you know, you have in any supermarket, you've got a premium on shelf space, right? And toilet paper is like the bulkiest item in the supermarket. It's big and bulky, right? And you can only fit a certain amount of toilet paper on those shelves, even if you dedicate a whole aisle to it. But of course, you know, you can fit like hundreds and hundreds of tubes of toothpaste, and you can have more toothpaste in your storeroom than you can have toilet paper because it's just bigger and it's lower profit margin, right? So like you're not gonna care as much. You're not making as much money out of the toilet paper. So as soon as everyone starts buying a little bit more of everything, the first thing to run out is the toilet paper because there's less of it and you can't transport it as quickly because it takes up more room in a truck.
Also, people see that others because they won't see if you take more toothpaste, but they see if you have another like 12-pack toilet paper in your cart.
Exactly. So there you go. And so, but then, like, you know, it gets into people's head that there's some people, those other people, them, they are hoarding. They are evil hoarders. They're either evil or stupid, right? Or you know, and like as soon as that happens, then you want to hoard as well. Like, you know, it's just the contagious. That's when it starts off. You know, it just inflames. And you can start to victimize really quickly. You know, it's those evil hoarders. It's like they're the problem. It's the people wearing masks. That's why there's a shortage of masks. It's like, no, there's a shortage of masks. It's a supply chain issue. It's like some industrial bloody supply chain issue. That's like the little old lady who's buying one mask from the chemist, the local chemist. She's not creating the supply chain to the hospitals of mask shortage. She's not creating that. But, you know, people get in their heads that those people in the society, those people are doing the wrong thing. Anyway.
And also interesting how that works because here in the UK, we did have quite a big issue with the toilet paper. Even
we still don't have enough toilet paper.
Yeah. And it was kind of coming ahead of schedule too. So even when the news hit, not even the news, but maybe some memes on Instagram about toilet paper, you could see that immediately the shelves were cleared. Now, what's interesting is that it wasn't a thing in Hungary. So in Hungary, apparently, it didn't really happen. And when I was talking to my mom about how's the situation, what's going on, and I told her about the toilet paper, she was shocked. Like, what? How is that possible? And interestingly enough, on our next talk, she was like, yeah, actually on our shelves, everything is fine. And even I just bought the same things. I mean, I bought another pack of toilet paper and she didn't even realize that. I mean, I did the same shopping as I always do. I mean, I added another like pack of toilet paper, but why did you, why did you do that though? Only because you talked to me. Yeah.
Everybody's doing it but everyone thinks other people are hoarders. I'm not a hoarder. No, no, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like it's just this logistical volume related, like thing. But yeah, so anyway, so it can get out of hand very, very quickly, and you get what you end up with lynch mobs and crowds. And when we think back to the fact that maybe, and this is the mimetic brain, it suggests this book, The Mimetic Brain, it says maybe we don't have this stable self. And, in a situation where you've got a crowd of people and you've got this sense of antagonism, and or in a feud, a blood feud, like you were talking about with the Iliad, there's a blood feud, and Achilles just cannot let go of it. And you've got this sense of anger and retribution going on. Even without that, what happens in a crowd is you simply become one with the crowd, and you imitate whatever's happening, and you're convinced. Like, they've had interviews with people, and they're convinced that nobody has the same recollection of what happened and who made what order or who moved first, because no one is in their own mind. No one is in their right rational mind. They've become, their mind, their self has been sucked out by the imitative energy of the crowd.
Exactly.
So,
and I don't know if you have in these slides anything about Peter and Peter's denial. I know that that was one of the videos that really captured my imagination. The story about Peter, like Peter, on whom the whole Catholic Church is built, and Christ said that, look, Peter, here are the keys, and I'm building my church on you. You will be the rock on whom I'm building my church. And at the same time, he told him that, and also, by the way, you will deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And that's exactly what happened. And Peter was like, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to go where you're going. I'm going to die if I have to. And when it came to it, and the crowd started to, the lynch mob started to group up on Jesus, the pressure was so heavy on Peter. He has the impression that he couldn't resist it. He was like, no, I don't know this man, because of the escalation and the fear and the pressure. And after that, Peter realized what he's done. But while he was in it, while he was in the situation, he was subject to it. And I really think that this was kind of a statement from Jesus that, look, it's everyone. I'm building my church on you. You will be Saint Peter. And Saint Peter, by the way, at the end, he died for Jesus. He was crucified. He even said that, I'm going to be crucified upside down because I'm not worthy of being crucified like my master was. So this is a great, great man. And he wasn't an exception. He did it 3 times. 3 times, so that I also found super interesting, and the kind of statement that Jesus makes with this is like, none of you are exempt.
That's absolutely it. Yeah, I mean, you can see it in yourself. I don't know if anybody watched that it was a beautiful movie released over the summer here called Jojo Rabbit. And it was about Nazi Germany, and it was hilarious, like really funny. It had Rebel Wilson in it. I was by this New Zealand director who's really got a very funny New Zealand sense of humor, and so it had all of that. It's very quirky and hilarious, but really, really moving as well. What was so beautiful about it was that it was from this little boy. He was going to become a Nazi, and he was going to join the Hitler Youth, and he was really excited about his uniform, and it was really excited about it, and it was really showing the humanity of everybody who was involved in that, in a sense, and that was what was so beautiful about it. But you can imagine, there's a group there's a group of people saying, that person, we're going to persecute that person. You're not friends with that person, are you? And you can see, maybe after 4 or 5 years of horrific war, you might have got to the moral or ethical or courage point where you could say, I am friends with them, and I stand on that, and I stand and I live or die on that. But you can you can see how, you know, it would take a lot of suffering and ethical turnaround going on in your heart before you get to that point where you wouldn't just say, oh yeah, no, I don't know that person, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and I know, and another example again from school. I'm bringing a few examples from school. In
Yeah,
secondary school, that was this guy in our class, and he was a bit weird, and basically we started to bully him, and it was horrible. Like if I think back, it's like I'm not proud of it at all. Actually,
yeah, yeah,
if there were a few things I could change, it would be that. This would be one of the things. But it was very interesting in retrospect. First of all, what that guy had to suffer and go through, but also how that whole thing worked in terms of the scapegoating. Because first of all, we unified against him, so we really articulated who we are and our standards by pointing at him, that he is not
yeah,
one of us.
yeah,
But also it was interesting to see how he became contagious, meaning that no one dared to touch him from that point. Even the girls who were like full of compassion and who didn't approve of this, I mean, a lot of them actually joined in. Even them, a lot of them actually joined in because of the
yeah,
crowd
yeah,
pressure. But even those who didn't join in, they couldn't really stand up and say that, hey, just leave him alone, because he became contagious. They couldn't associate with him, you know, because it was like radioactive. And it's horrible how it works, but also it's fascinating to see how effective that is to create cohesion in the group, you know.
exactly. That's exactly it. And this, as I think you expressed when in that Iliad video, this is where the biblical gospels turn that around,
Mm.
and turn to face the victim, the victim, the innocent victim, to the crowd and say, no, I'm not evil. You are creating me as a victim, and
Mm.
it's in your heart. That violence is in your heart. And that's the really profound thing. All right, so let's move on. We haven't even got to the darkest slide yet. This
Yeah,
is
we need to. Yeah, I mean, we need to
one
continue our
more.
descent. Yeah.
This is really, so here I've got this beautiful quote from Shakespeare, and like, this is the Dogs of War speech in Julius Caesar. Okay, and this is Brutus after he has been a part of this conspiracy that has murdered Caesar, murdered his in a sense his idol.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the play actually shows the different characters and how they get drawn into the conspiracy, and they all get drawn in slightly different ways. And you know, one of them is really kind of has a very weak sense of self, and gets drawn in very quickly and easily, just because they're the highly imitative and highly undifferentiated. But Brutus has done all this sort of rationalization to himself, and anyway, he suddenly, I think he suddenly comes to grips with the vision of where this might lead. Instead of being the positive vision of like, we have to do this to save the empire from the corruption of Caesar. And I'll read it out, like really, you know, it would be good to maybe you could read it. Maybe Steph read it. Steph could definitely give it a little bit of juiciness to this speech, but like, you know, you're gonna have to put up with this, like, it's like a kind of a Rebel Wilson version of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Okay. Domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war, all pity choked with custom of fell deeds, and Caesar's spirit ranging for revenge, with Ate by his side, come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry, havoc, and let slip the dogs of war. that this foul deed shall smell above the earth with carrion men groaning for burial.
Hmm.
So there you go.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It's
Carrion
powerful.
man groaning for burial. Hmm.
Oh, the stench of all the dead in the war and the battle. The stench of it is the stench emerging from this foul deed that he's murdered Caesar.
It's interesting,
And
by the
this
way,
whole
this whole idea of the smell, it keeps coming up, by the way. So when you think about the horrors of the First World War, which was new to us in the sense of the scale and also how value or devoid of value human life became. When you go through those memoirs, this motif of the smell was unbearable. It was like the smell of corpses all around, and it's that sense that you have that's the most visceral, because it doesn't really go through the like a barrier. It just goes straight to your brain without not much processing. For example, your visual inputs, it's going through a lot of conversion and translation. Smell is very raw in that sense, and it really goes to the heart of it. It's like something smells,
Yeah, and according to Girard, Shakespeare really knew what he was doing. He understood these mechanisms, and that's why you have this constant you get in the commentaries on Shakespeare and the sort of different academic arguments about what he was doing. You always have these two sides, because he actually presents both sides. He often presents both sides really strongly, and so some people will fall down on the side of he was really sort of saying that he was saying that humankind is, he was cynical about it, and he was saying humankind is corrupt, and other people say no, he was saying it's beautiful. But he's kind of presenting both all the time, because he understands, I think Girard argues that he completely understands this mimetic process and brings it to life with his plays. Anyway, so where does it leave us? What can we do? How can we be saved?
What man can do in the face of all this evil and darkness. I think it's I'm paraphrasing Lord of the Rings, when Theoden asks this question of like, what can we do? Like, just look at this, look at this pointless destruction, look at all this darkness. What can man do?
How readily we become caught up in victimization. How quickly, and you can feel it in yourself. You can feel it in yourself straight away. Like I have these, sometimes like you have these arguments with people, just text arguments on social media, and like you can feel the heat rising in you, like as in your anger, as you present your side and they present their side of the argument. You can, this huge tribes face off, and each individual is part of this facing off of these huge tribal conglomerations on both sides, the conservatives and the progressives and stuff. And it's like it's actually an illusion. The whole thing is an illusion, and yet we get caught up so easily in it. Anyway, so where does this leave us? So this is a picture for you. This is again some amazing famous artists that I haven't credited, but putting that aside, this is like a really non-academic approach. It's good. It's like you don't have to have a credit for the artwork. Okay, so this is cutting a long story short. Like actually, we've only just barely tipped the tip of the iceberg with Girard, as you probably realize, and like, but this is cutting through to some. I'm only halfway through this book, The Mimetic Brain, but this is the bit that I've just got to, which is saying that you always have these three choices, and this is what's going on. And I've kind of very much paraphrased it here, and I barely understand it myself. Like, what would I know? But you have a choice when you work, when you're interacting with people, and you can see the other as a model, someone that you and you can therefore be fully cognizant of your imitation and your mimesis, and that person is creating the desires in you. And in an ideal situation, they will either there will be a very clear cut master and apprentice role going on, which means that the master wants the apprentice to imitate them, and they're pleased when they do, and the apprentice is also pleased and learns. And you can even have, if you are super aware of what you're doing, you can even have a really positive point at which the apprentice even can become as good as or even better the master. So someone gave the example of the film Rocky, where Rocky has is so motivated to train because he just admires this other fighter, and then he gets so good that he actually the other guy agrees to fight him, which is like actually a compliment. And eventually, I think, I don't know, I've never even seen the film, but like apparently like he fights him and he beats him, he wins, and the other guy says, okay, I will now take you on and train you because you fought well. So this is an ideal model situation. There's one master and apprentice, or you can have you know, when you're not in a master and apprentice situation, you can have a situation where, you know, both people are aware that the other is a model, and that you are captivated by that other person's motivations, and they're captivated by your motivations, and therefore you get the ideal sort of synergy happening where you're actually working together. And because you're both understanding the intention that you're working to, or you might be more than one person, right? You can have a group of people working like this. You understand each other's intentions, and so therefore the productivity of the together arrangement works for the betterment of all, because you understand their intentions. You say, oh well, you're trying to do this, you know, we could do it better this way, and then the whole thing goes in a positive cycle. And you know, that sort of feeling when you're working well in a team, then the team is actually feeding off each other's energy in a really positive way. But most of the time, you know, the model thing is quite unconscious, and you're not aware of the fact that this person is feeding ideas into you, not consciously themselves, and you're catching their ideas. But then you might sort of think, well, you know, that was my idea, and like and then it becomes a rivalry, right?
Yeah.
But you can be very quickly turned into a state of rivalry. But then there's a third path that it can go down, and this is where the other person, you know, it could be this love triangle situation where you have two boys and one girl, and then eventually one of the boys just captures this girl's heart, and she says, look, I don't, you know, she rejects the second boy, and then it's no longer possible for that obstacle, that object to be gained. So what this rejected boyo sees the other boyo as a complete obstacle that's shut down his ability to get what he wants, right? And so the guy who wrote this book, The Mimetic Brain, he said that depending on which of these choices or which of these modes you are in relation to someone else, it will engage different emotions in you. So if you're in a model apprentice to master situation, you're getting positive emotions of learning and synergy and cooperation, and you know, the outcome being greater than the sum of its parts, that sort of feeling. If once it turns to anger, or if it does turn to rivalry, you will have a sense of anger and conflict and and this attempt to differentiate yourself from the other. And if you have got to the point where the object has been completely shut away from you, and the other person is seen as an obstacle, you get a sense of abandonment and depression. It's like, I can no longer have that thing. I'm being abandoned by that person, or that, yeah. So and that's it's a more a depressive state. And so this guy is arguing in this book that this is the basis of all psychology. All psychology. This is more fundamental than the work of Freud and the psychoanalysts and all the rest of it. This is the fundamental mechanism which engenders these different emotive constellations in people. And then what will happen thirdly is that your cognitive process, depending on which mode you're in, and we're all in these modes, we go in and out of these modes all the time, you will engage your cognitive processes to rationalize whichever mode you're in.
Yeah.
And this is the fundamental. So what he says is the mimetic brain leads the other brains, the emotional brain and the cognitive brain leads them around like that. They follow the mimetic impulse. And
this fits quite well into the model of McGilchrist with the right brain and left brain. It's not really a divide. Again, that's a misconception. It's not like one part of your brain is responsible for this and the other for others. Both parts of the brain take part in everything, but it's just like these different lenses are being applied through each. So there's like a left brain lens and the right brain perspective as well. And this fits quite well into it. And it's also really consistent with human decision making. So in sales and persuasion and influence, it's like one of the key concepts that you need to understand before getting into it at all is that people make the decisions that drive their actions on an emotional basis, after which they rationalize it and justify it. And from your perspective, when you are in the driver's seat, it seems like you are making a rational decision, but it's actually you're just justifying a decision that you made before you realize that you've made it.
And you may well have made it simply because it was suggested to you that you
exactly
made it.
Exactly. Actually, like that's what happens even in the sales process. It's a very powerful tool to point at other clients or others who already bought it, others who compete for that. You know, let's say when you sell an event, I was selling events for a long time. It's like there are 30 places and this guy and this guy and this guy is registering. He's coming to the event, and boom, you have the prize, you have the object of the desire. And they think that they make the decision because, oh, I really need to go to this event to whatever, like build skills or maybe no, you want to go, and you made the decision want to go because your desire was sparked through these psychological and emotional levers.
You want to do it because other people are doing it.
Exactly.
And it's been suggested to you. Like, so I that's right. I think, like, you know, you will know this back to front because it's about persuasion. But I think that with this power of persuasion, that you know, once you start to understand this thing, you've got this huge ethical responsibility because you know, the power of it is so great. Oh, I lost my train of thought. I was going to say something.
We were talking about the rationalization.
Oh, I know. Sorry. I was talking about suggestion, because it is all about suggestion. I was like, think about hypnosis.
Oh, yeah, hypnosis.
So hypnosis is where it goes directly to the mimetic brain. It's a suggestive process, and yeah, I can tie hypnosis to Jesus if you like.
I'd like, please.
But McGilchrist absolutely too, in terms of, you know, this sense that the right brain is always scanning the horizon for the next thing to desire. And it's almost like the right brain's sense of the world, or what draws the individual forward, is like McGilchrist talks about it in very poetic terms about the beauty and the wholeness and all that. But you know, perhaps part of it is that it's simply it's desire. Where will where you're kind of scanning for a sense of motivation and desire to pull you forward into the future from the past. And the left brain is a sense of attainment of that. So you're that's where you grasp something, you nail it down linguistically or conceptually. If you're not talking about actual prey that you've caught and now you're going to eat, right? If you're talking just on a conceptual level, you have got a sense of, oh, there's this amazing idea about such and such, and then you grab hold of it, or this piece of music is evoking something in me, and then, you know, maybe you get the sheet music and you learn it and you nail it down. And then the left brain nailing down of things is never as satisfying. And the interesting, in a sense, it doesn't have that same drawing possibility, potential sort of feel to it. And this is a classic part of the mimetic process as well. Like, you know, in this play, Troilus and Cressida, where the boyo and the girl are the microcosm of the Helen of Troy situation. When the boy gets the girl, at first it's been suggested to him that he might like this woman, and it's been suggested to her that she might like this man, and they there's this whole you know, buzz around it. But when he achieves getting her, she loses her allure.
Oh yeah.
Because of possession, because he's now possessed her, and then she feels this loss of interest, and so she has to go into the Greek camp for some reason, and she suggests that she's worried because if she has to go there, maybe there will be some Greek soldier that will want her. And so she's suggesting her desirability to this other guy. And as soon as she then, and it's a very, very subtle in the language, but as soon as she actually goes there, she has to go there for some reason, I can't remember what, that's when his desire really hits its peak, because he suddenly starts to imagine this unknown Greek soldier desiring a woman. And then he decides that he has to fight the Greek army, this Greek soldier, for the sake of this woman. And his sort of expression of his desire for this woman is that in the play, that is when it's hit its peak, when he's imagining, you know, all these Greek soldiers going after his girl, right? And anyway, so that's a bit of a tangent, but like,
no, but actually, it's even in the I read it in the Girard book. He brings that example of sometimes jealousy can reignite and rekindle the flame of desire between man and wife, for example. It can actually work like that mechanistically. And by the way, with regards to hypnosis,
but it's a pretty pathological way of reigniting desire.
But I'm interested in that. I mean, if you want to just talk about it a little.
There's so much we could talk about in regards to that. So you want to go back to hypnosis and
just a little, because I'm interested in that, because it's such a relevant topic. It's kind of a hot topic in the Jungian circles as well. So
is it really? I don't know.
Very much so. Very much so. So on James's channel, Jung to Live By, they actually talk quite a lot about hypnosis. It's one of the topics. I haven't had the opportunity to really take a dive into it just yet, purely because of bandwidth issues. But I'm interested in how that works. I know that even sales itself, I've been in that for over 5 years. I know it's kind of a hypnotic profession. You kind of use techniques that are bordering on being hypnotic. So I'm interested in how that works in human psychology, and especially how mimesis comes into play.
Well, if we are redolent with mirror neurons, with imitative cells in our body, like we are motivated by this thing. Like hypnosis is simply just a correctly placed suggestion, and it goes straight into this, what these people are saying is the most fundamental aspect of human nature. So but again, I think that this is where, like, you have to have a strong ethical grounding if you start to understand how this works.
So
because,
if you are a subject of hypnosis, for example,
yeah.
Is there a way to kind of arm yourself against suggestions that might be put into you that are just leveraging your mimetic function, in essence? Is that...
There probably is. There's definitely certain personality types that are more susceptible to hypnosis than others.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't tell you what it is. I don't know very much about hypnosis, but I have read a book that argues that Jesus, when he went to Egypt as a young man, learned the arts of hypnotic suggestion.
Jesus learned the arts of hypnotic suggestion.
Hmm.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. So because then you think about it, like, so for example, say Shakespeare, he's working in the theatre. He's observing, intently observing human interaction and behavior, and then putting it on the stage. The better he observes the truth of human nature and interaction, the more engaging will be his plays. The more money he will make, the more people will want to see them, the more people will be drawn to them.
Mm-hmm.
And he's obviously, quite genius in many regards. And then he starts, and Girard argues that actually you can see through the progression of Shakespeare's plays that he becomes more and more aware of all these implications of the mimetic process as he goes through them. And ultimately he comes through the other end to try and reconcile, because it's quite a bleak vision of human nature. But Shakespeare in the end comes through and reconciles this, and I think there's a lot of stuff in his plays about Christianity as well. But if you can imagine someone of that genius capacity who becomes so extraordinarily familiar with what these mechanics are and what their implications are in terms of interpersonal rivalry, of destroying people's lives and ending up in horrific long wars, you can imagine that at a certain point they would want to, like, help the world with their insights to sort of somehow improve things, make things better for humankind. So if, this is my long-winded argument, if Jesus was such a person and had been so steeped in the art of hypnosis and hypnotic suggestion and had understood how people behave, don't forget that the opening myth of the Bible is Cain and Abel, the warring brothers, which is the whole mimetic twinning mirrored enmity. And one brother kills the other, and if Jesus is understanding the insights in that about human nature, because actually this foundational myth of the warring brothers, I think, and the foundational murder that is at the basis of all these different civilizations and cultures, like the twins Romulus and Remus in Rome. And if Jesus is immersed in this and understands it, his motivation might very well be to make the kind of revelation that he ultimately makes.
And that's Girard's
about
proposition too, right?
Scapegoating, about showing this process at work in human nature, and revealing as a revelation, this is what you are doing.
Yeah.
You are perpetuating violence and then retrospectively justifying it by painting this person that you've killed as evil or bad or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know if you followed the logic there, but like,
Oh no, it's super. I mean, it is.
And Jesus, like, you heard it here first, right?
and maybe we can also in a later conversation can riff on this specifically, because to be honest with you, I don't really understand hypnosis that well in general. You know how that works, but that would be an interesting investigation to go into. But that whole logical case of him revealing the scapegoating mechanism, and as kind of like posing as an example and exposing that, look, you've just done that to me, and in history everyone will know that I was innocent, like everyone knows. No one says that I deserved it.
That's it. You have no more excuses pretending you don't know what's going on here.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
you can't go on having this repeated mythological structure whereby the good guys beat the bad guys and everybody's happy and it reconciles the community and makes it better again. Because actually it's just perpetuated violence as a result of a mimetic crisis process. And the scapegoat that gets murdered is the symbolic receiver of this antagonism, and their death and their violent murder, provides this catharsis that creates unanimity. There's a unanimity in the crowd as they murder the scapegoat. That unanimity has some sort of magical cathartic effect where everybody, the rivalry is suddenly deflated, and it's partly because the crowds are unanimous. Suddenly they've turned from this huge mirrored enmity into this unanimous crowd force that does the murder. Secondly, the suffering is, this is well, I don't know if this is actually true, but I think also because the empathy that you feel for the scapegoat, because you are feeling this death, the death of your evil is taking place in that murder. And suddenly there's this magical calm. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced this, but I definitely have experienced it in group dynamics where somebody gets ejected and there's suddenly a calm.
Yes.
One person's been ejected. So all the different rivalries have sort of constellated in the ejection of that person, and there's a nice calm. It's like a magical effect almost. And this is what Girard argues is the very beginning of ritual, of the sense of magic, the sense of some divine power that somehow suddenly made everything all right again.
Wow. And again, I can self-reflect with the same example of that guy who we bullied in secondary school. It was cathartic, I mean, from the outside, it was disgusting. It was ugly, but from the inside, it did have this magical power of us coming together, and it's kind of inexplicable. You can only see that in retrospect with a lot of like willing self-reflection. But it does work like that, and it's as real as it gets.
For sure. Okay. So that's the last slide. Actually, that's the end.
That was the last slide. Okay, cool.
But the hope lies in vigilance around self-awareness, and this vigilance doesn't have to be some sort of like mea culpa, like self-castigation. It's just a matter of like, observing in yourself every single time you are beginning to go down a rivalrous track. You can always tell because you'll be critical rather than trying to align with that person.
Yeah, I
I
see.
mean, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be discerning and critical. I don't think that at all. I just think that you can raise your self-awareness around whether you're actually setting up a rivalrous sense towards somebody,
Hmm.
or whether and if you can do it, and if you can create, you've got a couple, more than one person who is self-aware of it, you can be a model for each other
Yeah,
or something.
yeah.
But
And
it takes a lot of self-consciousness, I suppose.
yeah, and it's very interesting, like what the actual solution is or conclusion of Girard. Again, I haven't got to the end of it. I'm reading the Battling to the End as well, which I think it might be his last book. It's about the
It's a very late one. I know that much,
yeah,
and
might be the last one. I'm
it's
not
quite
sure. It's
yeah,
quite apocalyptic, and I
yes,
don't know what his conclusion is. He does kind of allude to the fact that the solution is to imitate Christ, and to understand what that actually means, because it's not like we have a conclusion on who Christ is or who he was. I mean, he is the most polarizing figure who ever lived and still is. Some people love him to the point of willingly dying for him, not even having met him. And some people hate him with a vengeance. So it's super polarizing. But Girard proposes that by imitating him, that's our only way out. Because you mentioned mea culpa, and I do have. I mean, in the past, I did have this idea about how Christianity it creates all this shame and guilt in you, but at the same time, I did encounter these ideas. For example, this mea culpa. Well, this is kind of mainstream now with extreme ownership. Jocko Willink, he's not a Christian thinker. I don't know if he might be Christian, but he never mentions it ever. And it's basically based on military leadership, and businesses use it all the time. We use it in our business. Extreme
mm,
ownership, which means that everything is your mistake. Like everything happened because you messed up. Everything, and I mean
yeah,
everything. Like you
yeah,
try to find your personal responsibility in
yeah,
everything that goes
yeah,
wrong
yeah,
all
yeah.
the time. Well, it really sounds like mea culpa, mea maxima culpa to me. Is
Well,
the same
yeah,
thing.
and I really meant it in the sense there's no point in self-destructing in a
Oh yeah,
martyred sort of way, but absolutely, and this is exactly what Gerard is saying, that if you are in a conflict with someone, it's probably because you participated in um, a rivalrous inflammation of the
yeah.
situation, and
And
like he's very confronting. It's confronting.
oh yeah, yeah, very confronting. And also that line from Jesus comes to mind: the hate the sin, not the sinner. And this is something that you keep forgetting. I keep forgetting it, because I get angry. But it's definitely a mental stance that you can take, of whenever something bad happens. Again, be discerning. Like, don't
Yeah,
sweep evil and darkness under the rug. That's like
yeah,
literally the worst thing that you can do. Like,
yeah.
it's not
Don't let
suggesting
them do it.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But then hate the actual sin. Like, hate the darkness instead of the
Mm.
person. And this whole Christian frame, that's also one of the reasons why it's intriguing to me, because I really think it's a working frame in the long run. If you think
It
about,
probably is. Look, maybe we should wrap up. I was
oh yeah,
thinking,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, but I think hopefully that like what we're doing here will fast track some of this understanding, because I'm in the same position. I would really want to understand the end point of Girard's thinking and what we can do, and that's exactly. I think that would be great. I think we'll speed it up if we're doing this together.
fantastic. Well, thanks for putting this together. It was a very good start for the journey.
No
Let's
worries.
see, let's see where it takes us, and then boyos and boyettes will have more of these coming,
Yeah, and
hopefully
just
soon.
like, everybody's homework is to like be self-aware about their rivalry.
Exactly. Just see it. Just see it. Like, you don't necessarily even have to do
Just
anything with
see
it.
it.
Just see
You
it.
don't have to judge it. Don't judge it. We all got it. But yeah, because it'd be really interesting to hear other people's, like takes on this and
Yeah,
stuff.
we'll
But
see.
yeah, that's the very tip of the Gerard iceberg. I think we've covered now.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thanks again. Any last words, Magenta, or should we just wrap it up?
We can just wrap it up. I think I don't have anything more to say. I mean,
All
I
right.
do, but like not now.
Next time. Okay. Boyos and boyettes, see you next time.